So my whole career has been dedicated to helping salespeople talk better. And the reason I know how to talk so well is I'm the father of 4 teenage daughters. They do the talking. Actually, I do a lot of listening. So I've practiced both my listening skills and I've watched really interesting communications. But the reality is that I've spent the last 25 years, and I can't believe it's been that long, trying to understand the dynamic between the seller and the buyer and what really goes on there. And you can actually diagram it and codify it and reproduce it. It essentially nets out to this. Our job as sellers is to tell someone who's doing something one way today that they need to be doing it a different way tomorrow. Otherwise, we do not get paid. So the job nets out to that, doesn't it? At some point, somebody who is happy and satisfied and believes maybe something's wrong, but I'd rather not change if I don't have to, we have to help them see the vision to do something different tomorrow than they were doing today, and preferably do that with us. That's the job of sales. The real interesting struggle when it comes to sales is that you didn't realize what a force you are up against when you think about where this person is when you go to meet with them. It is not like every day they're waiting for that 2 o'clock appointment saying, I can't wait for someone to come in here today and tell me I suck. It's a very American phrase. Are you good with that one? Are we okay? I can't wait for someone to show up and tell me everything I'm doing is wrong, and what you really need to do is this over here, and of course we are the ones to help you solve for that problem. That's not the mindset of the person who's here. They're just trying to keep the wheels on their company, and they're so focused on trying to do that that in reality they prefer to live in a place that is called status quo. Now, I was told if I bring up the phrase status quo in the UK, you will immediately begin thinking of a pop band. Is this true? I mean, so literally I can't say status quo because you're going to be off thinking of some, tune that you remember? Seriously. So if I said we have to get marketing and sales working in one direction, you can't handle that either. You'd be like, one direction. I don't hear another thing he said. Okay, so now that we made that clear, I think I can work on status quo for a little bit. So here's the deal, folks. The toughest job you and your salespeople have in their day job is to convince somebody they need to do something different tomorrow than they're doing today, and go to war with not your arch rival competitor and what their features are and your benefits are versus their features and your, remember the competitive matrix? Do you know what I'm talking about? That's that sheet you create that says, here's us, here's competitor A, here's competitor B, here's competitor C, here's all the features, and in here we get full moons and they get half moons. And as a result, you can see we plainly win because we have more full moons. That's not the argument. Your arch rival competitor is not the biggest rival you have. The arch rival you really have is the status quo. Because if someone's using your competitor and you're trying to defeat your competitor, the reality is the customer's not thinking about the fact that they're using your competitor. Your customer's thinking about the fact that this is the way I do it. And what you're asking me to do is do it a different way. You're trying to defeat the way they feel about their situation, not your arch rival competitor. And the way they feel about their situation has been identified and documented and called the status quo bias. And people live in status quo bias, and until you convince them they should no longer stay in status quo bias, that's where they will want to be. So let's talk today very specifically about how to defeat status quo bias. But at first, you have to understand the causes, or what Zach in his eloquent academic speech says, the antecedents of status quo bias. Status quo bias. People live in it because they have a preference for stability, and they have stability in their preferences. So you have to realize that it's going to be really hard to move somebody from there to there because they've determined their preferences, and they really prefer those, and they feel stable in that. So as a result, there's stability in staying with the previous decisions or preferences they made. You're at war against preference stability. In other words, until you make their preferences unstable, they're going to stay with the status quo. The second one is anticipated regret and blame. If we stay right here, it's been okay. There's been a few people, yelling at me or complaining about things, but at least I've survived and I'm okay. If I make a decision to change over here, I'm going to be putting myself up for potential ridicule and blame should that thing not go so well. So I would rather deal with the thing I know and just deal and hunker down, as opposed to put myself out there. And they begin to play this whole thing in your sales conversation, and they stay in status quo because of their anticipated regret and blame that they might get down the road. Safer here. The third one is the idea of the cost or action of change. There's a perception that if I do nothing, it won't cost me anything. Because when they're making a decision to change and buy something from you, that clearly has obvious cost implications. So the cost of change is literal in terms of pounds and dollars and euros, and it's also the cost of change in terms of the physical effort and the resources and the time and all the effort to get there. So what they see is no cost, big cost. I think I'll stay here. And the fourth thing is the idea of selection difficulty. As much as your companies and your products and services are better than all your competitors, your customers can't tell because you look and sound and smell the same as everybody else. So it's very difficult to sit here and go, oh, so many choices, so much information, and heck, it all sounds like what I'm already doing. Why would I take the risk? It's so hard to make that decision because it's so difficult to see anything different. So along the way, status quo bias means you as a salesperson have to make their preferences unstable so that they might be open to the persuasion of doing something different. You're going to have to show them that there's safety. In fact, more safety in the change than there is safety in the status quo. So that the anticipation is more of them being a hero, not being a goat. You have to show them that the cost of staying the same is actually more costly than the change they have to make. And you have to make sure that you see some clear differentiation and contrast between the way they're doing it today and the way you propose it tomorrow, so that they go, there is a clear choice to be made here. I can no longer stay here. You got to create enough contrast between the current state and the future state so the selection difficulty goes down. So this doesn't sound easy, but I tell you, it's way different than thinking about, do I know all my products and do I know all their features? Do I know all their benefits and do I know where I have full moons? Yet most of the time we train people like that. This is what you need to memorize. You need to certify on that. Or here's my process. I need to know where to show up, and I know who to find, and I need to know where to go. Then at some point, my lips must move. That's when we all pray for a miracle to happen. We've done everything right. We put our products together, and we put our little positioning together and our methodology together, and we've put everybody in a row and said, do it this way, meet with this person, find this person, here's where you go, and here's when you go. And at some point, they got to figure out what to say when they get there. And what they say when they get there has to be rooted not in the understanding of process or the understanding of products. It has to be in the understanding of the buyer and where they live and how to move them from there to where you want them to go. So what I've done is worked with Zach Tormala, who you heard earlier, with a lot of theories on certainty and uncertainty, and tried to put them into practice for you folks. How many of you make presentations or build presentations, give them or build them for part of your living? Raise your hands. Good, this is going to go way better since that's the number. Most of you, I would dare say everybody, either builds presentations or gives presentations, because that's where I want to get really practical this morning. I don't want this to be about theory anymore. I want this to be practically about how you can build a pitch or presentation that bears in mind status quo bias and understands where the person is across the desk from you. Little to do with your products and your pledge of allegiance to them, and little to do with your methodology at this point. It has everything to do with you with your lips moving. So let's talk about that for a second. Zach was great about talking about the decision-making science and everything behind it, and everything I'm about to share with you in terms of the construct of a pitch has to do with decision-making science and less about selling best practices. So here we go. In Zach fashion, which of these would be more persuasive in your mind? A pitch from a bank that tells your company you might fail if you take their money, or a pitch from the bank that focuses on your stated business needs as a customer and the benefits of taking their money? Now, at the risk of having led the witness by having Zach up here earlier, I'm not going to take a show of hands because you might be catching on to where this is going. But think about it for a second. Intuitively, with the best of intentions, would you lead with a pitch that tells someone, you know, you're having some financial difficulties as an organization. We understand you have sluggish sales. We understand that you have slow payments from your customers. We hear you have high inventory costs and that you have a need for a line of credit of $10 million. But before we go there, I'd like to tell you how you might actually fail if you take money from us. So intuitively, does that feel right? Doesn't it feel right to state the business needs and start to reflect back to them the way you can solve for those business needs and support that with some of your corporate capabilities and credentials? Well, that's what we wanted to test. Because again, the bottom line was, what will cause someone to be more persuadable and move off of status quo bias? So here's what the test was. We put 400 people in a position where we said, you are a medium business and you have responsibility to deal with an oncoming recession. Despite your success over the last few years, you are now facing a recession. And as a decision maker, buyer, customer, you have the three problems I mentioned: sluggish sales, slow payments, and high inventory costs. And as a result, you need a $10 million line of credit to float you and the business through this tough upcoming economic difficulty. So imagine that's you now. You're on that side. You're the business owner, and you need to meet with a lender. And now the question is, let's listen to that lender's pitch and then ask you a bunch of questions afterward to see how you felt about that. What we did is we took the 400 people and divided them into four conditions, four pitch conditions, which I will walk through very quickly so that you can understand what they sound like. And then we'll talk about who won and why. So the first condition was this. So you're 100 of these people and you watch this presentation. I'm going to shrink it down and make it quick for you. We understand the three business needs that you said: sluggish sales, slow growth, high inventory cost. And we understand your need because we've listened and asked questions. Your need is a $10 million line of credit. We're happy to report to you today that our bank is in a position to make that loan to you at a highly competitive rate. We can do this because we've had 75 years experience in this market, lending money to companies just like you. And we have dozens, if not hundreds, dare I say thousands of clients that look like you who have successfully worked with our bank. So that was one of the pitches. Okay, I abbreviated it, but that was it in a nutshell. Identify the stated business problems, confirm the business need that the customer gave me, say that we can solve for it at a highly competitive rate, and then do a little corporate credentialing. Does that not sound like a typical pitch maybe? Not unusual. So this condition I called the stated needs condition, responding to the stated needs. The second condition that the second 100 people watched was a pitch that opened similarly, restating the three business pains, identifying the confirmed customer business need, stated need, introducing the $10 million line at a competitive rate, and then talked about 75 years in business and the fact that they are good at small to medium business, and then said, hey, what you should know is we also have some additional capabilities at our bank that might be of interest to you. We have on-staff experts that know small and medium business, and they can come in and they can look at your processes and your operations and help optimize those to add value to our relationship with you, and in fact, make sure that we don't just give you a cookie-cutter solution, we tailor it and customize it just for you. I call this the value-added services pitch. Are you familiar with this kind? Where you start to introduce the key differentiators that didn't make it into the front of the story, but I can't leave these out. These are the big ones. And so you start to pitch these things. The third condition was this. You're getting the drill now. These people heard the same intro, and it went like that, but all of a sudden it took a turn. It stopped and said, hey, before we go any further, we need you to know that industry statistics have shown that fully 42% of companies like you that take money during a recession will fail even though they took the money from the bank. So what we want you to know is we have the ability and the desire to help make sure you don't throw this good money that you're paying for after bad process or problems. That's why we have on-staff experts to help analyze your business, look at your operations, and determine any potential problems, and make sure that you're only putting money after the good, fixing the bad before it gets a hold of you, and you will ensure success and not be just another statistic. We call this the unconsidered need last condition. Now, the fourth condition was this. Hey, we understand you're in here because you've got some challenges. Slow payments, sluggish sales, high inventory costs, and you need some money. What we really want you to know before we go too far into this is that 42% of companies that take money during a recession from a bank like ours actually end up failing. You need to know this is across the industry that almost half of people who take this money fail. We don't want that to happen to you, so we have some on-staff experts in all the operations, from back office to front office operations in small business, who will work with you to make sure there are no hidden problem areas so you can maximize the impact of your dollars. Of course, we can give you those dollars because we have them. $10 million or pounds at a very competitive rate. And we can do this because we've been in business for 75 years. Now, what you basically see here is simply an arrangement or choreography of certain content. And we wanted to find out in which of these conditions people would respond the best, assuming the status quo bias. Now, here's the question I have for you. Think about your pitches for your organizations. When a salesperson's lips actually have to move, they've asked some questions, they've identified some needs, and now they got to present back to the customer and make this customer care, make this customer see you as different, and help this customer overcome their current preferences and make choices to do something different tomorrow. Which one of these sounds most like your presentation structure today? Raise your hand. There are no fines, no tickets, no violations. Raise your hand if more than likely your pitches sound like number one. You simply respond to the stated needs and provide some corporate credentials. Okay? No one willing to admit that. That was not that nobody does that. That was my commentary on that. Number two, identify and confirm the valid stated needs, and then put your value-added differentiated services on the back end as an effort to distinguish yourself. Raise your hand. All right, so we're getting close to half the room there. How many of your presentations are like number three? I'm going to respond to the stated need because I heard my customer and I want to prove that, but I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to introduce something they didn't think of, a problem they maybe didn't even know before they came in the room, and get them that way. Who puts their presentations together sound like that? Maybe a good 25%. Who does number four? Walks in and says, before we go any further, you really need to know this. And it was something they didn't even bring up. Who leads with an unconsidered need and then responds later to the stated needs? Hands up. All right, I got 2, 3, or 4 here. So my question is, most of you chose number 2, okay? Which one do you think won the test? Number 1? Number 2? Number 3? Number 4? That's great. So everybody's like, hey, we do it this way, but this one's the winner. And we wouldn't want to do that. That'd be too easy. So so my question is, you know the right answer. Why don't you do it? I mean, this would be done. I got nothing to say at that point. Well, that's, I guess, why I have a job. Because our best intentions are always best intentions, but our instincts are sometimes off. We have best intentions, good intentions, but not always the right instincts. So the test went something like this. 400 people, average age 33.76. Zach recruited them. Zach helped create these conditions. And then Zach ran the test so that it would be fair. We'd step back from it and see what would happen. And they were gender, education, and age appropriate for the average B2B buying audience. And they asked a bunch of questions along the scale 1 to 9 for uniqueness and quality, and then the scale 1 to 9 on choice and attitude type measurements. The real important stuff, the persuasion or persuadability of the message. These are just a few examples, and they go a little bit deeper under each of them. So there was a rather healthy set of questions after they viewed this. Now remember, they only watched one condition. They had to respond to what they saw. And here's what happened. In the area of unexpected or uniqueness, which you discovered is pretty important here in terms of status quo bias, you need to be a little bit uncertain of your status quo in order for you to reconsider even staying there. Because if you're confirmed that you're certain in it, then you're all good. You ain't going nowhere. This is what it looked like. The unconsidered need being introduced into the presentation had a dramatic impact in the ratings of unexpectedness and uniqueness. Remember, it wasn't even a comparison. I just saw this one, and I just responded in terms of what my probably my experiences with presentations are. Interesting, the value-added one performed the worst. Now, what's interesting about these numbers is these would be argued as an academician to be statistically significant. Sometimes statistical significance is like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 percentage points. Sometimes it's 0.5, 0.6. The delta here is in like the 15, 17% range. These are like home runs by academic statistical significance. Now the question was, tell me about your perception of the quality of the pitch. So this was interesting, a bunch of quality-related questions. All of a sudden, the other ones all sort of fall in line, and the unconsidered need first distinguishes itself again by statistical significance of a very wide margin. But the big one is attitude and choice. All those questions you saw for attitude and choice, they blended the responses together. So the question is, which ones creates the most persuasion? So the other three are not even statistically significantly different from each other. The unconsidered need coming first is the only one that provides an element of additional persuasion when compared to the other structures. In other words, introducing something the customer hadn't even thought of, a problem or a missed opportunity they weren't even aware of, and doing that first is the only form that has a chance of improving the persuasiveness of your pitch, according to this research. Interestingly, Zach said this in our research: it's important to introduce and highlight an unconsidered need because it's unexpected. And unexpected is good to improve processing and persuasion, but it only helps when it is at the beginning of the message. I think you heard him say that earlier. When it happens at the end, it's actually too late because people are already certain they know what you're going to say, that they've established that and determined that their status quo is probably more than likely safe enough. So I find this rather interesting and intriguing, and with the last few minutes that I have left, I want to share with you the concept that I believe is going on here, and I'm going to go to the flip chart easel pad to do that because somebody here said, you didn't mention PowerPoint earlier. Everybody was all boo-hoo down on PowerPoint. So I'm going to go old school with a few markers over here, and then this afternoon I'm going to come back with a second study from Dr. Tormala on the power of whiteboard versus PowerPoint, and you're not going to want to miss the results of that. But right now I'm using both to keep you in suspense. All right, here's what's going on after Zach and I had a conversation about this. So if we want to get the camera up, we're going to get this on the screen so you can see what's going on. Identified the fact that customers have needs, no doubt, and companies have capabilities to respond to those needs. So our organizations have multiple capabilities, and at some point, when you go in and ask a customer, either through diagnostic discovery or voice of the customer research, they are going to tell you they have some needs. And you're going to get all excited. Why? Because you're going to say, I have something for that. And you're going to say, there's my solution story. I got to go tell that story. And then you uncover another need. Oh, good Lord. We are in Fat City now. I got something for that. And you say, there is our value proposition right there. This is now a solution story. It's no longer just a product story. It's the intersection of needs and capabilities. So there it's a solution. And I would tell you that, no, it's not. It's a commodity. This story right here, where you have identified customer needs that match specified or specific capabilities to resolve for that, will give you a presentation that merely shows up in front of the customer as sounding exactly like everybody else. Why? Who's not asking customers questions anymore? I know they said this up here. Oh, we got to get them to ask questions. I believe that's true. But for the last 20 years, we've been told through solution selling, go ask questions. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion. So you're not the only one asking questions, and the customer is pretty much telling you the same exact needs. You do voice of the customer research, you're going to get these things, the identified needs of the customer. Guess what? Sadly, most of your product portfolios are not necessarily that different from your competitors. So when you line up the most obvious responses to this, you get a recipe for a commodity. Because everyone's stories are going to sound the same. And the problem inside of a same story is I am certain that I have now got selection difficulty, and I am certain that no one's convinced me that they're doing anything that different from what I'm already doing. So there is no urgency to leave the status quo, and there's no uniqueness there for me to leave the status quo for. Does that make sense? That's what's going on, we believe, in the world today of just basic asking of customer needs and identifying these capabilities to match that. So companies, in a fit of of enlightenment, say, what I need to do is start talking about these other capabilities and putting them into the story as value-added services, which most of you raised your hands and said, that's how we do this thing. We don't go in the red box. We bring some blue lines into the red box, and that's how we distinguish ourselves. So our stories are a little bit red and a little bit blue. And then the thought is this is going to be distinct, different, and that's why the customer will choose us. What we just discovered from the results is apparently not. And here's what the research, which is called choice overload, says. What you call a value-added service, the customer perceives as adding cost and adding complexity. It's called choice overload. If you're so inclined to read any of this stuff, it's pretty interesting. It goes back to even Zach's issue about processing. As soon as you try to put more things into it, the customer's supposed to remember, now why are they better? The forcing people to remember more is harder, so therefore they actually project that it's not better. But if they can remember a couple key things real quickly about you, they're like, this is the one that makes more sense. So this is all part of that whole idea of ease of processing and choice overload. So the reality is this is a good intention on our part, but it's not the right instinct according to the psychology of decision making. So what has to happen in order to break through is you have to begin to introduce unconsidered needs. Unconsidered, close enough, needs that lead to then your unknown strengths. The idea being that these things are important to the customer if there's a context for them to care about it. Lack of context means it adds cost. This is why you're so expensive. You have stuff in here I don't need. This stuff I don't need could create failure points for my organization. I don't want that. And you start to tell a story that starts to create a sense of uniqueness because now these matter because they care, and you create some urgency out here. There's urgency in the unconsidered need, not in the known need. Because if I know my needs and I tell you what my known needs are, the mere fact that I can express them to you means I'm not dead yet. If I'm not dead yet, I have a little lack of urgency because somehow I've managed to get along this far. And the problem is that when you come in with that solution, I know one thing for sure. This hasn't killed me, but that could. You think you bring in a solution. Here's my solution. And you're like Mighty Mouse. Here I come to save the day. And the person's like, ooh, save me. No. You come in with your solution that looks like this, and the Hallelujah chorus is presiding over it. And you bring it to the customer, and they look at it, and they don't see a solution. They see a change management project. Simple as that. This hasn't killed me, but that could. Somewhere in here, I don't feel threatened enough to make the change very urgently. But the thing I didn't see coming, and the thing I didn't see coming as fast as you say, and the thing I didn't see coming as big as you say, now that could kill me. So there's an element in here of the unconsidered need creates a sense of uncertainty around preference stability and a sense that the cost of staying the same might actually be more costly than change. It also creates enough distinction to separate and create contrast for selection difficulty. And the anticipated regret and blame starts to look worse if I stay the same than if I make the change. Because at some point, this story becomes more compelling than staying the same. But we have to have the ability as an organization to identify those stories in our company. What unconsidered needs do our customers have that link to unknown or unspecified strengths, and build those stories? Then you have to have the guts to lead with those stories, because that's what the science tells us. Again, our intentions might be, I'd rather respond to their stated needs because that feels like the polite thing to do, and then I'll introduce this other thing later. That's what our instincts or our good intentions would say, but apparently, according to the research, our insights or our instincts might be off there. So the idea of introducing the unconsidered need and telling a different story. Now, some things I've seen when I talk about this is people struggle to know where their unconsidered needs are. So the way I'm going to conclude this is to give you 3 types of unconsidered needs So tomorrow, when you go to build a story, you can stress test your story and say, are these in there or not? Or the question will be, this is the question I want you to have tomorrow when you look at your pitches and stories. Are we in the red box or the green box? Now, if anybody knows anything about business and the devouring of certain marketplaces or businesses, who's all heard of Blockbuster? In the United States, Blockbuster was commoditized by a product called Redbox. Have you ever heard of it? It's a vending machine that you put at a store. And it was commoditized by Netflix, which is logo is a little red box. This is how I remember that a little red box could commoditize a multi-billion-dollar company. You don't want to be in the red box. So test to make sure your stories aren't living in the red box and you're simply a commodity that has no urgency or uniqueness behind it. And here are the three real quickly that you should learn. Then we'll let you go to lunch and we'll catch you in the afternoon. Number one unconsidered need or form of it is what I call the undervalued need. This is the one that the customer does not appreciate and prioritize. But you know if they prioritize it and appreciate it enough, you've got a little something to solve for that. One of the keys in unconsidered needs is not to introduce a need you can't solve for, because then you just make people angry. Let me tell you this data point about something that could really be bothering you. And then the customer goes, oh yeah, that's bothering me. I'm a little uncertain right now. And their mind is saying, I need to resolve to certainty. I need to resolve to certainty. What do you got? And you go, I don't know, it just sucks for you, I guess. I just thought we'd start a little dialogue. Thought I'd give you a little insight about the industry. Thanks. The idea of this is you need to amplify. If there's a need you know that the customer should believe is more important than they've actually prioritized it, you need to show them that that need, that challenge, that threat, that problem, that opportunity is coming faster and bigger than they thought. The size and the speed of that need is greater than they thought. You've undervalued this. So let me amplify that. And you probably know some of those issues in the industry that you need to amplify so that your dialogue can take off and go there, that you have some distinction in solving. The second one then is what I call the unmet need. This is the one that your customers have been doing workarounds for, like they've used duct tape to try and fix it, or they've used extra bodies to cover and compensate. But over time, this Band-Aid approach is starting to seethe and heave underneath. And the customer's looking at the Band-Aid going, I think I'm okay yet. In fact, the Band-Aid might even be covering it to such an extent the customer doesn't even remember they had a problem. I'm good. What you got to do is peel back the Band-Aid to show them the infection underneath and say, you know, what you really want to do is go on vacation. Or in the case of a customer, I know you want to scale and go global, but this is unsustainable and this won't scale. This won't get you there. In other words, you have to reveal the unmet need that is hidden inside their organization. Where are they using too many people for things that you don't need that many people for? Where are there failure points where things could drop through the cracks and they didn't know the cracks were there because they've tried workarounds? Where are those? Introduce those, express those, and then respond to those, resolve those. Zach said, introduce the uncertainty, resolve it, and then make them certain you were right. That's a pretty simple method. But this is something, you might have an unmet need that's hidden somewhere. The third one then is the unknown. These are harder to find, but they exist, the unknown need. I don't know, I'm looking around the room to see how many people have as much gray hair as me. But I used to manage all of my music with CDs. Anybody else from that era? You had compact discs, and in fact, we had so many compact discs that I had furniture in my living room to contain my compact discs. You would go out and literally buy compact disc management furniture to keep your compact discs feng shui. And then, when I go out and exercise, I would carry some compact discs with me, and as my music management system grew, I would just buy a bigger fanny pack. And that would grow with me, all right? And then at some point, I had to put that thing on the visor of my car as my commute got longer and shove CDs in there and then shove CDs on top of the CDs and then have holders all over the place. I had a major CD music management system. So then when somebody came up to me and said, hey, I can put all your music on something the size of a credit card and you can carry it in your pocket, did I say, give me one of those? No, first I said, who are you, freaking George Jetson? And then I said, no way, look at all I've invested in. I mean, are you serious? I'm still excited about the digital sound quality over vinyl. I'm still excited that my music doesn't melt. I'm excited I don't have to dust it. This is great. And I'm excited by the fact that I can put it in a visor and take it with me. It is reliable, high quality, and portable and flexible. And you're telling me this is high quality, reliable, portable, and flexible. I ain't willing to go there. Till somebody said, hey, when you buy a CD, there's 10 songs on that CD, give or take, right? Yeah. How much do you pay for that CD? 10 pounds? Yeah, 10 songs, 10 pounds. Sounds about right. How many of those songs that you listen to on that particular CD do you usually like to listen to another time? And how many do you hit fast forward to go past? In fact, how many times have you taken another CD and burned only your favorite songs on that? We created a workaround at that point. But somebody said to me, okay, so how many songs on a CD do you typically want to listen to more than once? Raise your hand if you think it's less than 3. If on your CDs, when you bought CDs, less than 3. That's the majority of people in here. Typically, I discovered on my CDs it was 2 out of 10 that I loved and would want to hear more and more. And I suddenly had this realization. I have been wasting 80% of my music spending dollar in all of its glorious CDs, 80% on crappy music. And I'm like, seriously, this is unsustainable. And then I thought about it. Where else would anybody in the world get away with charging you all this money where 80% of it's crap, other than the cable industry? Just one more. Maybe the airline industry, I don't know. But the bottom line is, I felt like this is no longer sustainable. I can't keep investing like this. And then the person said, what if you could go online and listen to every song on a CD, almost in its entirety, as many times as you want, without ever getting dressed? And then only buy the ones you like and only pay for that one. So that when you have $10 to spend or 10 pounds to spend, you will spend it on 10 pounds worth of great music. So that 100% of your music dollar now goes to stuff you actually want to listen to. You sometimes actually have to introduce the unknown problem to somebody, because in my status quo, I have made a tremendous investment in the way things are. Undervalued needs and unmet needs might start to move my status quo, but eventually the unknown need is the thing that says, I am a Neanderthal, I must change. I give these to you as the 3 types of unconsidered needs that then you have to link to certain unknown strengths of the product or service that you offer, so that it becomes now something that creates uniqueness for you and urgency for me, and it overcomes the status quo bias and allows me to make the change that you want me to make. And that's not going to happen from reading your website and reading brochures. Only a salesperson with their lips moving telling a better story will convince me of that. It comes down to the story, doesn't it? At some point, where you show up and who you meet with doesn't matter. But what you say when you get there can be all the difference. One of my favorite authors is a man by the name of Malcolm Gladwell. I know he's distinctly American. I think he's fairly global. You've heard of Malcolm Gladwell? Yeah. Malcolm Gladwell's first book was called The Tipping Point. Anybody read that here? Yeah, that's why he's rich. Malcolm Gladwell sold millions of copies of this book. He now charges $150,000 for a 1-hour speech like I'm giving today. Malcolm Gladwell makes you buy his books. I'm going to give you ours for free for being here today. This has no reflection on the value of what you've received here. The thing I really envy about Malcolm Gladwell is he didn't even come up with the idea of the tipping point. A man named Morton Grodzins, a political scientist at the University of Chicago, identified the concept, tested it, published on it, and even named it the tipping point 40 years before Malcolm Gladwell's book. Malcolm Gladwell was selling us all a 40-year-old unoriginal idea, and we bought it. He's now rich and getting richer and selling more books, and it was actually this guy's idea. He was the innovator. He was the first mover. I would ask you, if both of them had access to the same product and he had it first and he had it 40 years later, how come he's the only one that made any money off of it? What was the difference between the two because they had access to the same product? I would submit Malcolm Gladwell told a better story. And I believe that can happen in your market every day. Have you ever lost to an inferior product? Have you ever sold at a higher price point and got the business? You told a better story, or your story was out-told by your competitor. The best story told the best still wins. Now, Malcolm Gladwell must know this because his latest book is called David and Goliath. He's now ripping off God. At some point, your hubris hits a tipping point, doesn't it? So the bottom line is, I've given you one idea this morning, and I've got another one about visual storytelling this afternoon, all tested with Dr. Tormala, putting his ideas and theories into practical application for you. But the ultimate goal is, leaving here, you now have a choice in terms of how you tell your story. Will you be Malcolm Gladwell, or will you be Morton Grodzins? Thank you very much.